Oh, well, John MacGowan, welcome to the NatCon Australia podcast.
G'day, good to be here.
Really pleased to have you on. I usually try and do an intro for people, but I thought it might be best if you describe yourself from the outset because you're an interesting character.
Well, most recently, I'm Australia's most recent failed political candidate. I came dead last in the Tasmanian election in the division of Clark on Saturday. So that's how I'm currently describing myself. I'm a former political advisor for the Liberals and later political consultant. And in recent years, I've just become kind of kind of shaman of the radical right, I guess. Kind of get people active and maybe make something happen in our small corner of conservative politics nationally. So
Cool. Hey, so you were, as you mentioned, you're a candidate down there in Tasmania and you're originally from there. Why should the world care about Tasmania?
Well, Tasmania is fascinating, right? Because, and I actually had a conversation with someone right before I ran, who was a economics lecturer on the mainland, and he was telling me how much he loves Tasmania because when you're teaching teaching public economics, Tasmania is such a great case study because its revenues are only 9 billion, its expenditure sits around 10 billion. As at scale with 500,000 people, it's just a really good economic example. And Tasmania is really the canary in the gold mine for a lot of problems that, the mainland's about to face, but it's also a success story in a lot of ways. While everyone's arguing over net zero right now, it's worth remembering that Tasmania has been at net zero carbon emissions since 1998. So there's a lot of things in Tasmania that are going really badly that I think, you can learn some vital lessons from on the mainland, particularly around you've seen the announcement from Chalmers yesterday around, 50% of Australians now employed by the Commonwealth government. If you come down and look at the economic situation in Tasmania, we're kind of patient zero for the crisis in the NDIS. Tasmania has the highest level of disability in the country. And so you can kind of see the stagnation kicking in here, the economic stagnation. So I think there are some important things that people can learn from Tasmania, but also just from the political perspective. It's a sign of what happens when you have a complete breakdown in the party's ability to appeal to people. Labor failed abysmally in this election, and the Liberals have just landed exactly back where they were, and no one likes them. No one's been convinced on any of the core issues. Which to me, looking at what's been going on in Canberra in the last week, this is the fate of the Liberals going forward. Federally, even though they might have won down here. So, yeah, I think people should care about it. Of course, they didn't end up caring about me in the end with my 279 votes.
Let's get into that. I always think with Tasmania, it'd be kind of good if Trump did issue a threat to an exit like Greenland, because then the eyes of the world you'd have journos flying in and, outrage, and no doubt public policy would take a greater interest in the place. So you were a candidate, and I was thinking about, I think Tacitus, the old Roman historian, he said that you only really learn politics by governing or by being involved in it. It's all very well having theories, but what did you learn by being a candidate that you didn't know before?
Well, I definitely learned about the people who actually vote for you. I spent close to 20 years, maybe a solid, in a solid 15 years just campaigning with the Liberals. I think I worked on every single election campaign from 2004 to 2019. But with a couple of day-long exceptions, I did that inside an office, right? I did that inside campaign headquarters. I'd never... And during this campaign, because I had no money, so I was literally leaving the house every morning and knocking on 100, 200 doors every day. So when you're seeing the voters in your face and what they care about, you do learn that there's a lot of important things that they care about that you maybe didn't think about. For me down here, it was really the health system, which is not something I've had a real policy interest in ever. But when every single person talks about it and you start to look at it, because it's, in the current kind of contest of ideas in right-wing politics, healthcare is not something we really think about, except insofar as we don't want, kids getting HRT therapies or whatever. Like, we don't really talk about how the hospitals work, why you have things like ramping, elective surgery waiting lists, crisis with ambulance arrival times. Like, we don't really think about that stuff. So that was very interesting. I learned that it doesn't matter how conservative you are. It is very hard to take wealthy people's concerns seriously if you talk to poor people first. So next time, if I do it again, I'm definitely going to door knock the most wealthy areas of Hobart before going to the poorest areas. It's a fascinating electorate as well, because it actually has Australia's fastest growing wages in the south and Australia's poorest people in the north. So from one end of the electorate to the other, you have like a gap in inequality that you don't even see in the Northern Territory. Because Darwin is kind of carved out in that seat. So that was really fascinating to go from, I knocked on people's doors who were sitting in their living rooms wearing sleeping bags with St. Vincent de Paul hand warmers that they were putting in them to stay warm in -1 degree, because they couldn't afford to put on their heating until the off-peak time for the power company. And then you go up to the other end of the electorate, into Sandy Bay, where I knocked on 2 doors and 2 women told me that their most important issue was a platypus that lived in a rivulet behind their house being saved from overdevelopment. So that's when you see things like that. I mean, I was joking with people in the tally room on election night that it is the closest I've ever come to being a Labor voter, was seeing the electorate up close and personal. So I definitely learned that. I mean, I definitely learned that, money is not an abstract concept in political campaigning, which for those of us who've worked at the pointy end of it, it becomes just an abstract. Like, I've sat in offices and hit send on $2 million ad campaigns and never thought anything of it. I think in the last federal campaign, I racked up $100,000 just in company searches doing opposition research. When you're on the ground on your own with no Climate 200 billionaire, with no donations because the thing was done in 5 weeks, and just the money in your own pocket and how to spend it, you realize how crucial money is to winning. We had an independent up in Franklin, Peter George, ex-ABC guy. He's Australia's first male teal, which is an insane proposition. Like, a male teal is like a male childcare worker. But he got $60,000 out of Climate 200, and you could see it. Like, you could see the difference in his campaign. I mean, he wasn't even really saying anything. Like, his campaign didn't really. I mean, he just didn't like the stadium and doesn't like the Liberal Party. That was his whole campaign.
It seemed very small fry, the kind of issues that were being discussed. Right, it was the stadium to some extent. But I would imagine, 50 years ago, Tasmania, while it still would have had some very, very poor pockets, wasn't as reliant on public funding for its economy. There was, significant manufacturing base in Launceston. There was mining. There was all sorts. Hobart wasn't just Canberra, south of the Bass Strait. And why? And in a way, look, going back on history, Tasmania was sort of with the Tasmanian dams issue in the 1983, they were, in the Hawke election, the landslide, Tasmania voted against Hawke. So it was kind of interesting. They actually bucked the national trend. So I kind of
They've done that a few times, yeah.
Yeah, I'm sympathetic in the sense that they're like, well, look, we tried to do it on our own, but you killed killed what we were trying to do. So give us your money, Canberra. And
which is basically the 200-year history of Tasmania, is that happening? Is Tasmania really successfully going it alone, and then an existential shock hitting them? I mean, one of the most fascinating things about the Tasmanian economy that I learned going into this when I did a lot of research was in the 1800s, Tasmania had 2 depressions. And they had 2 depressions before we even had a real economic understanding of what a depression was. And the reason that happened was because Tasmania had not just, it had the world's fastest growing economy. Between 1803 and 1841, when there was depression number 1, and then again into the 1880s, in those 2 periods, I mean, Tasmania was the wealthiest colony in the empire. and it had the fastest growing economy on 2 occasions, and it bust twice for existential reasons. I mean, the collapse in the whaling industry was the later one. I mean, the first one was, there's been a couple of really good papers published on this, was really a prototype of a stock market crash. Before we understood what a stock market crash could look like, which wouldn't come until the early part of the 20th century, Tasmania had it happen twice. And, a funny thing is that the Tasmanian Parliament is actually, it's the only parliament in Australia, other than the purpose-built one in Canberra and the Spring Street, that is not a repurposed bunkhouse or something. It's actually the old Customs House. It's actually the former hub of the Tasmanian economy that, of course, just fell into disrepair after the bust of the 1880s. So you have this history of tremendous economic growth here, and then losing it, often for reasons that aren't their own fault. And when you walk around Tasmania now, when you walk around Hobart particularly, it's like the ruins of a once great civilization. Like there is more kind of beautiful sandstone colonial architecture, kind of block to block here in Hobart, than there is in Sydney or Melbourne, because it grew that fast. It had that much money.
That's the story of Australia writ large, though, isn't it? It's got a beautiful environment, and then you're kind of walking through the ruins of what was previously built. Why? How can that be turned around in Tasmania? Because Tasmania, in a way, and this is a perennial grumble of people who grew up in North Queensland, it's incredibly represented politically. Clout at a national level in a way that other regions that are just as large in terms of population and far richer do not. How can things, building another stadium is not going to help?
It's not going to fix it. Yeah. I mean, I said a couple of times during the campaign that, it was an average idea executed terribly, and it was the only idea that was on the table, and so we should do it. But that certainly wasn't going to fix it. I mean, how to fix it is kind of to contextualize it nationally. I mean, one thing we got to do, and the right is really bad at doing, is you actually have to stop and recognize not just what you're doing badly and what needs to be fixed, but what is it that you actually do really well. And everywhere has things that they do reasonably well. I mean, in New South Wales, they do infrastructure development really well. And 15 odd years ago, they put in a bunch of reforms that opened the door to building good infrastructure quickly, and they figured out a funding model for it. I mean, in Victoria, they do education really well. Like, if you look at pre-tertiary results down in Victoria, we can complain about the ideology in the schools or whatever, but at a practical level, they do that really well. The one thing that Tasmania does really well, although there are huge problems with it, is energy. And Tasmania had, in the late 1990s, it was effectively net zero. You had hydro, you had wind. The oldest wind turbines in Australia are down here in Tasmania. Like, these wind turbines were brought online in 1998 and no one cared. There were no complaints. In 2016, Tasmania had an energy crisis because of low dam levels and because of the insane decision to plug us into the national energy market. And we had to bring out diesel and oil electric generators to fill in gaps in the grid. Now, even accounting for burning not just coal, but burning diesel and oil to keep the energy grid active, over the last 30 years, we're still close to 150% renewable energy over this entire time frame. So Tasmania's got the ability to be a green energy powerhouse. And this is why they want to do things like the Marinus link, so they can sell more energy into the mainland. But see, all that's doing is supporting the carbon offsetting ambitions of mainland companies. What Tasmania needs to do is say, no, it's our green energy. And if you want a green powered business, if you want to have a carbon neutral manufacturing center or an AI data hub or something like that, you got to come down here. You have to physically get down here. And we have heaps of room. We have the cheapest housing in the country, in a country with a housing crisis. Tasmania is the best one. We have all these advantages. And I mean, I wrote this in a few press releases that obviously didn't get run anywhere during the campaign, but, leaning into those things we do well here and building that out, that's the secret. And I think it's the secret nationally, like at a national level, is stop complaining about all the things we do badly and figuring out how to fix them. Figure out what it is we do well and lean into that as deep as possible. That's the only way you're going to fix anything.
Do you think that on the right, and this is obviously a bit of a bugbear of mine in Australia, there needs to be a rethinking of kind of like the Howard era or the Keating Hawke era model? Because,
Yeah.
it's hollowed out the place industrially, in particular Tasmania. I remember going to Launceston and you can see it used, and you can look at old videos and you see the place with, it's a manufacturing hub. I had Campbell Newman, who was originally on there, and his dad represented that place, and they dealt with the consequences of the tariff wall dropping over 30-year period, and it was devastating. And yes, it's pretty now, and they sell nice sort of niche agricultural products there. But the Jewish synagogues closed, the mining industry's gone. They're still largely dependent on welfare, even though the Launceston is supposedly much more of the kind of go-getting part of Tasmania. So do you think, are you on the same page with me? Is that there needs to be a rethinking of
absolutely. Although I do think to an extent, I mean, I think certainly on, like, if you want to call us like the online right, the emerging, or I've been calling like the nascent radical right, I think we've dumped the Howard era brand of liberalism a long time ago. The question is, and one thing we can say about what passes for the organisational right in this country, whether it's One Nation or the Liberals, I mean, they certainly have not. And, they're out there right now talking about the aspirational voters. Like, we're back in 2004. I mean, aspirational voters now are trying to get out from under the NDIS and from, a future where they're going to have to be aged care workers, if anything. I mean, that's the reality in Tasmania, right? I mean, Tasmania's manufacturing base has been absolutely gutted. I've 2 generations of my family worked at the Zinc Works, right? And the Zinc Works, now the Near Star bauxite Zinc Works. Yep. So they had a bit of classic case of corporate rent seeking. They came out in the middle of the campaign saying, well, we're going broke and we need government bailout. They are trading on the Brussels Stock Exchange at 0.06 euros right now. They have market capitalization of 7 million euros. We are talking about bailing them out $15 million, which adjust the currency. That's more than their company is worth to keep these 4,000 jobs. I went back through history and had a look at how much that was worth at various points when my father worked there, and then my grandfather worked there when he first came to Australia. And that was once a $4 billion company that has collapsed over time. I mean, the company's changed hands a few times. And so you can really just see by looking at that business, like the collapse in Tasmanian manufacturing over time. I mean, it is a huge export market.
The mining process industry is across the country. It's not just Tasmania. I mean, Matt Canavan and Susan McDonald and others are in Canberra trying to raise hell about it, because Mount Isa mine, or it's across the country, right? We have it's about 5%, depending on how you define it, of our economy, which is manufacturing. But if you get rid of the metal processing industry, that sinks dramatically, and that will happen.
And the crazy thing about the Zinc Works is because they do bauxite as well. I mean, if you look at what's happening with steel in the United States, so we're getting slogged with the tariffs or whatever, but they're only putting a 10% tariff on that bauxite because they need to import that to make their own steel in the United States. So it's bizarre and there's others. The other 2 sites they have in Australia are facing the same problem, and it is a bizarre scenario to think that we're sitting on this gold mine. How are we not making it work economically? I mean, where I certainly split on the views of people like Canavan and that kind of pro resources crowd in Canberra is I think we have this challenge right now that a lot of our people, when they say I'm pro the mining industry, it's not really true. They're pro certain actors in the mining industry. and they're not in many cases supporting the industry. They're supporting the companies that are currently there, and they have this kind of too big to fail mentality, which means you do bail people out. And like, if you go back to the automotive industry in the 2013 election, like, I think Tony made the exact right decision by not bailing out the automotive industry at that time, because we were on the cusp of the change to electric vehicles. There was no sign that they were going to improve, and we weren't getting anything out of the deal. We have to create a culture of only supporting businesses with equity. We have to have equity in them. And, my biggest fear with the Zinc Works is that it ends up like the BHP Steelworks site in Newcastle, where when it collapses, it's after a period of being a black hole for money, the state gets lumped with the cleanup bill, which is exactly what happened in Newcastle. So BHP kept struggling on. They kept getting topped up from everywhere they could. They end up going under. And then they just strip the place for the liquidators. And then we've got to come in. The government has to come in, remediate it. We had the ports industry, which helped a great deal with that. But you still end up wearing the long-term cost as well as the social and economic cost. How you avoid that is, when these businesses are in decline, is every time you bail them out, you say, shares, please. And that means, you can only get bailed out for 40% at that point, because otherwise we're going to have you bored, and then we'll be able to change things.
You're still, by the sounds of things, a little bit kind of more on the economic rationalist wavelength, probably, than I am, and that term's misused. But I say these days, the consequences of that open borders right from the 80s have been a decimate economy. And it's not even rational, because you're not even really grappling with people talk about a trade agreement with China, and they talk about it in an abstract way. They don't know the details. People.
Well, no, most people don't even. Yeah, they don't even really understand what we're exporting.
We have 100% manufactured goods coming in from China duty free. You will not have a manufacturing industry in Australia as long as that occurs, and metal processing, amongst other things, will be shipped offshore, because that's what can be done, and that's, on paper at least looks. If we lived in a global free trade zone, and that would be, and nations didn't exist, makes sense, but that's not the world we will ever live in. So it's sort of how do you what changes do you think should occur on the Liberal Party, which is still the major centre-right party in Australia?
A lot,
ideologically and structurally, to make it better.
We're in reverse order, because, look, foundationally, my experience with the Liberals is that they don't have an ideology. I don't think they've had a coherent ideology probably since the 1980s. The Liberal Party's ideology is winning elections. That's it. And they will do or say anything to win elections. So that just brings you back to the structural problem. And that is an outgrowth of their administration and their organisation, which funnels a certain type of person into office who can win elections, right? So it's not about what they believe in. It's not about what expertise they bring to the table. It's the most difficult thing to do in the Liberal Party that I found while I was there, was to get anyone from outside the party mainstream into Parliament who could contribute. And you look at some of the best political leaders this country's had, and then look at the stories behind getting them in. Mike Baird's a really great example. And Mike Baird was the son of Liberal Party royalty, right? He was Bruce Baird's son. He was one of the best banking minds in the country at the time. He had a lot to offer. Without Mike Baird, you would not have a metro, you would not have WestConnex, you would not have any of that infrastructure, because he figured out how to pay for it, right? But we couldn't get him in. No one wanted him on the northern beaches. It was, John Howard had to be called in to get the guy in. For all Malcolm Turnbull's faults, and they are legion, he couldn't get in, right? An interesting one is who later ended up becoming a kind of major moderate power broker in his own right, was Paul Fletcher. And Fletcher knew more about the telecommunications industry than anyone at a time when, Gillard was doing the NBN. Struggled to get him in. But a guy like me who might keep his mouth shut but has, 15 years experience as a staffer and in branches, boom, I can get pre-selection in like a week. Right. And that's the structural problem with how the party works, right?
Before, that the ideal candidate is PwC staffer in a loving relationship with
a man.
Possibly, God bless them, but and that has never said anything, never written an op-ed, never engaged in any type of fight on anything of consequence apart from like notionally being in favor of lower taxes. That's the ideal candidate. And the constituency for that is actually not anywhere near as popular.
It doesn't exist anymore. It doesn't exist anymore. And this goes to like what they're doing right now. I mean, and I was talking to someone yesterday who had just been right before Susan Lee's aspiration speech, had been to a function with Brian Loughnane. And he said Brian just said the exact same messages, like word for word. It's like this is already the new Liberal Party platform, the new aspirational Australian thing. There is I mean, look, people love him or loathe him, but Cos Samaras of Redbridge did a fairly succinct analysis of where they won and failed at the last campaign. Now, I fundamentally disagree with Cos's view that, although it's recently proved right in Tasmania, that, the Liberal Party needs to go left, the Liberal Party needs to moderate. But when you look at where they lost in the last election, they lost the aspirational voters from 2004 to 2007. So Howard's battlers, Howard's people that he won over, who were Labor voters, predominantly in trades, predominantly in the mining industry, in the small manufacturing sector. These were people who were on really high wages based on comparison with what people earned in the past. They were spending like sailors. These are the guys building McMansions, buying Toyota Hiluxes in the early 2000s. Those guys didn't do so. They didn't do well, all of them, over time. 22% of marriages in Australia end in divorce, right? So if you think back to the Howard tradie who was voting for his EBA, voting for more mines, voting for his wages to go up to infinity and for his house equity to go up for infinity, that guy gets divorced. Well, everything he's worth is cut by 50%, right? When you look at those COS numbers, the Liberals lost 44 to 56-year-old men who rent, right? Now, that's a weird kind of cohort to lose until you think back. Who were those guys under Howard? Those were the aspirational guys under Howard. So if they've lost them, we never had women, right? We've never once had women on the right in this country.
Well, we did back in Menzies' time. But
They
misunderstood, where we had very little female representation and no female cabinet ministers apart from Edith Lyons, I think. Lord God bless her. Yeah. So they misinterpret that a little bit. That data, Cos is useful. I mean, he does numbers, but sometimes the counsel he gives to the right.
The fundamental, which is disingenuous anyway. Like, he doesn't really care about us. So.
Absolutely is. I mean, mass migration is not a political winner for the right. It is a political winner for the left over time. Yep.
To go back to what we said about their lack of ideology and the fact that all they want to do is win elections. I mean, this brings in the migration question, right? Because I mean, it was it's one of the earliest lessons you learned in the Liberals as a campaign operative and professional. Was the kind of first principle of Liberal Party campaigning is about coalition building, right? So, and this is why it was always frustrating back when I was there to see like the Sky News crowd talk about, the Liberal Party base. Like there's this base out there, this 10 to 15%. Those people don't exist. How the Liberal Party have always won elections is by taking little tiny cohorts, little demographics, getting them all together. Sometimes they have like completely contradictory wants and desires, right? And you get all those people together and you get them to vote for you. That's why mass migration is great for the Liberals, because you get like these diverse units that you can appeal to individually. So the Liberals, prior to me leaving, I mean, they were all in on the Chinese. Right, they were out there in the northern hills area of Sydney and Chatswood, going after the Chinese vote in a massive way. You had guys in southwestern Sydney who were going for the Christian Lebanese vote. So the strategy was always to pull these little groups together, and mass migration is great for them because it's just more little groups, and you can atomize.
Well, it's not winning strategy, John. I mean, I know
it's not.
I love to do outreach, but I like to say, you might. There's this myth that where they say, well, the Chinese, they're commercially minded and some of them are socially conservative, or the Muslims are socially conservative. You're never going to win the Muslim vote. And so no matter how much outreach you do, so it's this situation where, you're losing 70% for every cohort that come in, but you're trying to make on volume. It's like, no, you're going politically bust doing that with that strategy.
Yeah. The trick for them is marginal seat campaigning, is that they just end up not caring. And so they don't care about the fact that they're losing working class white voters or middle class, aspirational white voters. They don't care if they're not in the seats that they care about, because in the Liberal brain, they're not going for 50. They're not going for a national vote. They're not trying to bring everyone on board. This is where Labor can be a little bit more clever. Is that, Labor don't kind of think like that. Some on the left do, which explains how Albanese just keeps getting better, or not getting better in an electoral sense, not in a political sense. But the Liberals, they don't think like that. They just think in these tiny little pockets in individual seats. And that's a consequence of their just anemic branch structure. So because the Liberals don't live where their voters are, they just really don't care at all. The Liberals are used to living under Tanya Plibersek and Allegra Spender now.
They wave to the outer suburbs and they say we're supposed to be voting against the voice, but they don't live there. And
no, they don't.
Branches in Perth and in Brisbane and in Sydney and Melbourne, they're all in the teal seats now. All the life members, all the donors, and their motivation is, we just need a stronger, God bless him, but bring back Tones who can argue the case more strongly. And let's throw a lot of money at third-party organizations to be the right version of Get Up. Well, what do you make of it?
Exactly.
It's worth they're a new addition.
Yeah. I had a problem with them all the way back in 2019. Where they were effectively just, a campaign contribution to Tony Abbott, and they were this kind of clownish group of ex-Tony Abbott staffers driving around in the Captain Get Up costume and pulling stunts. I didn't think there was much value there. And then over time, they've kind of morphed into this, Australian version of, some of these US super PACs. And look, they get a lot of money because there's a lot of money out there for, just on the edge of the Liberals. There has been for a while. If you look at, Liberty Works and CPAC, for example, there's always been this little bit of cash there, just on the edge of the right, but not on my right, but in the middle. And Advance is very delicately calibrated itself to hoover that up, and hoover it up from, the things that the kind of liberal boomer right winger cares about, whether it's trans stuff or the resources stuff, or increasingly Israel and the hating the Greens, things like that. I don't see there's any political value to it at all, except for they're basically just a consulting company, and their clients are the people who donate. So I don't see them actually contribute. They certainly didn't with the Greens stuff during the campaign, right? They actually got Labor more seats, so by fighting against the Greens. I don't believe, and this is a controversial view that I have, that some on the right disagree with me on. I just don't see the Greens as our enemy at all. I see the Greens as our opposition, and that the healthiest and best thing that can happen to our country is that on one side of the parliamentary chamber, you have people who are genuinely conservative, nationalist, or on the driest economic fringe, and on the other side of the chamber, you have progressives, socialists, Greens, and the crossbench should be Kylie Tink, Allegra Spender, and Andrew Bragg, right? Because that really is the smallest cohort of people in our country. When you knock on doors and you ask voters for their political ideology, people tend to either self-identify as a progressive, as a socialist, as a conservative. I've never met an ordinary person who volunteered the fact that they're a classical liberal or a social democrat, right?
Well, I'm sure you've seen that chart which shows where the political class live and then what the actual voters turn out after the election. And basically, most voters are economically conservative and actually a little bit more kind of socially, not quite as socially conservative, at least some of the conservative class purport to be in some areas. It's sort of easy. It's sort of like 1950s. They're not. They're in Australia almost, right? They're actually, they're in favour of sort of tariffs and protection and government support for industry at some level. There's no sort of evangelical Christian right, which is fighting back against the culture wars, because those culture wars don't exist because we're all one kind of people. So it's
the collapse of and this is one of the thing I think Advance has really exploited is the collapse of the Christian right in this country, because it just doesn't exist anymore. I mean, the old liberal Catholic right was really gutted at the kind of moral level by the various scandals of the Catholic Church, and there's really no appetite from anyone to prosecute a lot of the Catholic Church's kind of views anymore. And the Catholic Church doesn't do themselves any favors, because they're more interested in economic issues for themselves than they are about any social issues anyone cares about. The evangelicals have proved through like the ACL and others that they're just completely inept at campaigning. And so if you can't keep losing the argument, at that point, what's the point? I did had to do a survey during the campaign. The ACL sent out all their lists of questions and everything, and they were super angry at me because when they asked me about abortion, and I know some of these guys in the ACL, I said, look, I find the practice abhorrent. I've campaigned against it for years, but we keep losing the campaigns. You keep losing the campaigns. You can't convince anyone of your position. So why should we waste any more time and effort on something that 70% of the population disagree with?
John, I just think there needs to be the tide, when the economic tide goes out and all the other sort of structures of society have been dismantled, often in the name of liberalism, then the idea that you can go to, for example, the industrial Midwest and preach to them and say, what you really need to do is, really, remoralize your society and not tackle your trade issues, and other things which you've actually left these guys hanging to dry. Like it's a little bit. I had that article on the Alliance for Responsible Citizenship, and it's all good stuff, and I actually agree with them a whole lot of things, right? But they didn't. That first conference, supposedly big thinkers, they didn't mention immigration once.
I know.
Literally down the road, you've got people going so you can talk to make these fantastic Oxbridge arguments about, persuasive with great op-ed writers about this, that, and the other, and everyone will clap, and I'll clap along too. But you're not going to kind of tell a different story to the guys chanting friggin' death to whatever Israel.
Yeah, exactly. But that touched on something really important. Like, I mean, when you talk about, trying to convince people, you're effectively trying to reverse engineer the outcome, not necessarily through a policy prescription, but through it's social engineering. I mean, so many of our problems, there's so many of our problems are downstream from immigration. But if you look at the issues, if you look at the question of abortion, right, for the right, you can fix so much of that just by changing the society. Having a society where women aren't forced to work to keep a family and put their kids in childcare, having a society where people can just have children and look after them on one wage is a much faster pathway to lowering the rate of abortion than arguing with the left in Parliament and just banning it. Right?
Well, I think that it's part it's part of the solution, and there are certainly heroic types who still make it work and scrimp together and do everything, admirable saints in our society. But you've got to have a framework which works for 70% of the population, not the absolute kind of much smaller minority. I just think some of those guys need to understand that you've got to stop the tide going out, rather sort of railing against the tide, and it's not a remoralized society that will do it in and of itself. It's more than that.
And this is the problem I had in the beginning with Advance, and they have kind of shifted on it a bit, is, like you said, if you're not talking about immigration right now, you're not talking right-wing politics.
No way.
Because it is central to every single thing. And, some of the Christians don't like it because, who is filling up the churches nowadays? It's it's migrants, right? Yeah. So the Christians they don't want to get on board with immigration. For Advance, I mean, they went through that entire federal election campaign and they didn't mention it. I know exactly why they're mentioning it now. It's because they've got leftover money. They didn't spend all the money, so now the kid's in the office. they're saying, well, now we can talk about immigration because we're not under all this pressure to talk about the Greens or whatever else.
Because in the Liberal Party in Australia, I mean, Australia generally, right? You look around the world at centre-right politics across the Western world, and immigration is the number one issue. I mean, you've got the Tory party in the UK, which wiped it out because it didn't take immigration seriously. Yeah. And in Australia, the what's being promoted here is we really need to sort of David Cameronize the Liberal Party, be kind of touchy-feely. No, and I say to people, no one in the entire Western world on the centre right is talking like that. Why are you talking like that?
It's crazy. It's crazy. I mean, look, I understand the logic because there are just like, I think I've written whole articles about this kind of cargo cult mentality that Australians have about US politics, about foreign politics generally. And you don't look at the local circumstances. And like, I mean, if you look at immigration in Australia right now, we have a worse situation than anyone else. We are bringing in more people than anywhere else.
Even the UK guys can't judge the UK guys. Obviously, you there. But when they said by 2030, 30% of the population in the UK might be bought overseas, and you're like, well,
So we've already got that, and so I mean, one argument might be, well, are we already past the threshold? Like, are we already past the threshold where those strategies will work? Do we then need new strategies to claw something back, or is it because Australia has never really had any kind of organised question around immigration? It has always been like, if you go back to the end of the White Australia policy, it's just always been this fait accompli, this given. We've never had a tension. Even when Pauline Hanson shows up in the mid-1990s, it's not really a credible question around immigration. And the Liberals' kind of strategy for so long, which was to contextualize it as the question around illegal immigration, I mean, had this toxic impact on Australian politics because we never stopped and talked about the quantum when the major centre-right party is there saying, well, we're going to crack down on people smugglers and crack down on illegals, like as if there were guys like with garbage bags of clothes running across the desert to get to our major cities.
Well,
we're just bringing in millions.
John Howard used to run a line that it's because we cracked down on illegal immigration, the Australian population could support larger numbers of legal immigration. I've never seen proper there was a Lowy poll that supposedly supported that. There's never if that was ever true.
No one's ever supported that.
It is not true now. And Matthew Goodwin, who I'm sure you're aware of, UK political scientist, he ran a poll in the UK which showed that unsurprisingly, British people actually couldn't care as much about illegal immigration as they do of the legal numbers. Which makes perfect sense. The legal numbers are actually far, far smaller.
Do you know, I mean, I suspect, and getting good data here on this stuff is impossible to get, but I actually suspect Australians look better on refugees than they do on the economic migrants that we bring in, because Australia's history with refugees has actually been really good. If you go back to, the Vietnamese who came out at the end of the Vietnam War, if you look at Christian Lebanese who came out after Yom Kippur, I mean, even Greeks and Italians in the 1940s are, for all intents and purposes, refugees. The problem is economic migration. The problem is, the guys who are coming out here who do not contribute to our society beyond spending and making money. And that is the thing that is grinding the gears of the public every single day. I mean, net zero immigration is the catch call right now. But I mean, I tend to think that the most elegant solution is simple remittance taxes. And that you can fix a whole chunk of this country in an hour of passing a remittance tax, because people are going to stop coming out and people are going to go back. And I mean, you could remigrate a significant percentage of the people who've come out here since the end of COVID. I think I modeled it. I think 33% is the right number for a remittance tax.
Well, there was a news story that came out the other day which showed, I think it was 38 billion per year being remitted. Which is
the majority of which to India.
Which were extreme numbers and something that has never really been disclosed to the public in a newspaper article or they've been focused on the past. John, what about outside the mainstream centre-right parties? what do you think the challenges are to setting up a new centre-right party like Reform in the UK?
Yeah.
Um,
There's two challenges straight off the bat, right? One is the personality issue, which is which is a consequence of Australia's elite overproduction, right? Is that in the last, going back to the structural problems of the Liberals, we were producing centre-right elites at a faster rate than we were creating political jobs for them. I'm a consequence of that too, if you want to be honest. We generate these people through our centre-right political institutions, and then there's not always going to be enough places for them to work, and so they then radicalise. It's the Steve Bannon thing, right? If you look at Bannon back pre-2016, that guy should have been running a Hollywood studio or running a Democrat campaign, and instead, because he's a victim of right-wing elite overproduction, there's not enough jobs for him, he goes the other way. We have that here in Australia to a massive degree with the named parties. Like Clive Palmer should really just be a part of the Liberal institutional kind of background noise. He should be a donor, he should get the things he wants. He shouldn't really be running a political party out of a sense of vengeance. Pauline Hanson, again, is another, not enough jobs for someone like Pauline Hanson. So you've got all these guys lurking around. And there are very few of them, I think, that have any real value. Jared Rennick being the only one, I think, as at a policy level. I think Jared has tremendous value. So the model of, well, we're going to all crowd around one guy and it's going to be, John MacGowan's National Conservative Party. Like, no one's going to do that. Or if you do it, it's not going to work. So you need a party that's legitimate. That's the first challenge. The second challenge is the modern Australian right is just getting so ideologically diverse that you need everyone on board. If you look at the numbers, and I have a presentation, a PowerPoint presentation I do with these guys, where I basically show the news poll results in order of party preference from left to right. And then you overlay it with the bell curve of ideology, because one thing that we do know about Australian ideological tendencies is that they normally distribute. And when you show people that overlaid, who we are becomes really obvious, because there is this gap down the end of the curve, and that gap from the very tip of it, which is neo-Nazis, through to the edge of it, which is the edge of One Nation. That's who we're talking about right now. That's who we're talking about for a new right-wing party that are really unrepresented right now, and it's about 5%, maybe 5-6% on a good day. Maybe less if you cut out the Nazis. So you've got this. It's really only 5% that you're starting with, which is where the Greens started. If you go back to the 1970s, 1980s. This is what the far left started with, and today they've doubled that, and they're a reasonably potent force. So you have to go into it with your eyes wide open and say, if we're going to start a new, beyond the centre right political party, you are not walking into Parliament in 3 years. You are not you might. Some of you might walk into Parliament, but you're not walking into government.
It's not setting up a centre right party to focus on the things that Advance does, right? Like, it's not like, because that's that they position themselves as being to the right of the Liberal Party, and we've got to keep them honest and campaign things that they won't talk about because it's too difficult or what have. Really, as has been seen overseas, you've had certainly people dissatisfied in the UK with the existing political consensus, and you've had Trump in the US who's come in with, like, I think in Australia, the centre right, they will agree with Trump on everything that Jeb Bush would agree with Trump about.
Yeah.
And then they hate his trade policy, hate his foreign policy, and will be okay with some of his immigration policy, but think he's gone way, way, way too far. And I don't know. There seems to be a lack of reflection that, hey, this guy has won in the most competitive political environment in the world.
Yeah.
Twice. I say probably 3 times. And surely there must be some lessons for that you can learn, rather than trying to saying the future is David Cameron.
The biggest lesson is a personality lesson. Like, I think my view on Trump is a little bit different from I don't kind of see him as a policy phenomenon. He's just a personal and a cultural phenomenon. He's a cultural brand, and it's the whole thing about how funny he is. Like, he's endearing in this weird way. He's authentic. Australian politicians are none of that. Like, there is no one in Australia right now with even 1% of that. And so you need to, and the challenge with a new political movement in Australia is, and this is where a lot of guys, I think, get really lost, is they think, well, maybe our Trump is going to come. Maybe we're going to get a guy like that, and he's going to, stand up there and tell jokes in the debate and call Albo's wife fat. Like, maybe that's going to happen. I don't think that's going to happen, because the cultural technology that creates a Donald Trump,
she's not
the pipeline, the pipeline out of reality television and into politics and business, that just doesn't exist in our country. So I think you have to put that aside, that we're ever going to have like a cultural phenomenon like Trump. So then the question is, well, what will this movement look like, and what will it do? And Australians do like debating policies. That is something that what defines our election campaigns. And so, what you're effectively looking for from our side of politics right now is a party that has a three elements to its platform: an immigration solution, whatever that looks like, whether it's net zero, whether it's my exotic remittance taxes or whatever. So immigration, number one.
One of both.
Two, you want both. Yeah. Two, foreign interference as the cornerstone of a national security policy, and just as a cultural policy for Australia, to recognise that we have huge issues with Chinese foreign interference. We have huge issues with Israeli foreign interference. We have huge issues with American foreign interference. And no matter what side of politics you're on, I guarantee you right now you believe in some psyop that is foreignly interfered, whether it's the right with Russians.
Just on that particular point, because literally breaking news overnight, Tulsi Gabbard announced he has referred Barack Obama to the DOJ for criminal prosecution, and has said there is irrefutable evidence that details how the former president and his national security team directed the creation of an intelligence community assessment that they knew was false. I don't think the mainstream in Australia political class will be able to process that.
I don't think they are. They're completely incapable of it, right? No one in Australia is talking about this stuff adequately, which is why I say, like, if I was going to start a party tomorrow, if someone gave me $1 million and said, start a party, get 100 guys, run, try and properly win, that's why it's my number 2 that I would think about. Because at the highest level in this country, it's all anyone really talks about. It's what the business community talks about. It's what, behind closed doors, it's what politicians talk about, is how important foreign interference is. And then the third thing, of course, is just our basic civil liberties, which we're just having constantly eroded every single day. You're going to have to age verify yourself on search engines in December. They're intent on punishing us for every single bad habit we have, whether it's smoking or drinking. The censorious nature of Australian society just keeps getting worse and worse with every passing year. And outside the libertarians, no one is addressing that with a otherwise coherent platform, which also includes things like immigration and everything else. And the recognition that so much of what they're doing on civil liberties right now, the immigration issue enables them on. Because these people who are coming to our country, they are not people who value freedom and liberty at all. And so when you say to those people, we're going to ban you from doing stuff, they're like, well, that makes sense, because we get banned from doing everything back home.
Yeah, demography influences ideology. They haven't worked that out in many people. They still want to go. They still think the electorate is 1984 and Hawke is debating Howard in Parliament House, and amongst a common kind of culture outside, within which you can have ideological differences, and they don't quite get. Demography changes things. It changes things in Boston when the Kennedys, got in there and everyone was voting for the Irish. It wasn't as though they were voting for a political platform. John, just to sort of change tack slightly, how much of the problems with our politics are a result of the mainstream media in Australia?
I mean, they're really patient X for pretty much everything in this country. I mean, how bad the mainstream media is. I mean, when I ran, when I made the decision to run about 5 weeks ago, and I kind of set myself a budget and said, look, I know I'm not going to win. I'm doing this for various reasons, some of which are just purely experimental to see, get data for our guys in other campaigns. But I kind of thought that Well, if I'm honest with myself about things I'm good at, I am good at getting media. I mean, I get other people media all the time. It just shocked me how difficult it was to break into the mainstream media down in Hobart. I was in the paper once, I think, and I was on radio twice in 5 weeks, and I was trying like every single day. And I mean, the other independents all faced the same problems, but it felt more like that I was being punished for being right wing, for daring to be right wing in Tasmania, like, because no one else had been. I mean, One Nation faced this in the federal campaign as well, and that kind of culture permeates everywhere. Every single media market has this same problem, that they do not want to give genuine, any kind of genuine challenge to the mainstream right a run at all. And then they'll call you a Nazi to your face if you say some of this stuff out loud. I mean, I don't know if they'd even let you go on radio at this point and talk about like immigration the way we talk about it on podcasts.
It's right? Just so weird because, you now have, I mean, you've got a great little Twitter following, and you shit post away, and it's all interesting, provocative, half serious stuff, and sometimes it's serious stuff. And people are like, oh, that's sort of outstripped the mainstream. And I said to them, well, the president of the United States and his vice president are pretty much posting exactly the same type of stuff.
They shit post on Twitter, right? That's the gateway drug for young people now. I mean, this is how young people engage with politics. Yeah. I was shocked at I had in my head like an idea of what kinds of people would vote for me and who would support me, but it was predominantly people under 25. Like it was a lot of young people engaged with it because they were engaging with it online. That's where you kind of like know who I was from. And I think the media are terrified of this because if you go inside the media companies, which are just in perpetual decline, like it's terminal decline at this point. I don't know, you saw the thing a while ago about the project getting cancelled, right? I mean, when I was working on the Bruce Lehrman thing, and we had Lisa Wilkinson in our sites, we were getting intelligence out of Paramount that they didn't just have the project in their firing line, they had the entire Channel 10 news and current affairs division. And Paramount were having meetings and saying, well, why do we pay for these guys? Like, they make no money. They contribute nothing to our organization. We get no talent development from them. We're paying some of these guys like Lisa Wilkinson like $1.5 million. It's more than, anchors on NBC get paid to go live to an audience of 400 million. So they're in serious trouble. The media are in serious trouble. They don't know what to do about it. And it's all they can do at this point is ring fence their business, try and do some regulatory arbitrage with the government and actually try and get more beneficial terms, which is why you see them work so hard on things like the social media bans, because in their minds, they're like, well, if we can just undercut our competitors, if we can tax our competitors and get some cash out of it, that's really the best the mainstream media in this country can hope for. You have insane things too, like the fact that our radio guys, what is the biggest emerging media platform in the world right now? It is podcasting. Australians are the biggest podcast consumers in the Western world as a consequence of having the longest commutes. So Australians are sitting in cars for 2 or 3 hours. They're listening to this stuff. How did we, with all these radio stations, with all this radio talent, how has not one of them broken out into podcasting? Not one. Kyle and Jackie O have a podcast. But it's just their show on a podcast. The model isn't changed. It's unlistenable because it's still got the ads, but none of the music, right? Ray Hadley, Chris Smith, Fordham, all this emerging radio talent never made the jump. Alan Jones decided instead of like jumping in on digital media that he would try and run a TV station. So he went from one dying legacy media model, radio, to saying, oh, I'll just try the other dying media legacy model. It's amazing he didn't start a publishing house. And so none of these guys are moving fast on it, right? What you're doing right now, this is the future of Australian media. This is the future of Australian journalism. What we're doing on Twitter is the future of Australian mass communication, right? These guys are going to be completely dead.
Just look at my own media consumption habits. And it's pretty much Twitter and podcasts. And occasionally I'll check in on the, I would say it'd be 90% Twitter and podcasts. And occasionally I'll check in what the headlines say in the Australian Financial Review.
Yeah.
And then
I personally subscribe to the AFR. That's it. And, you can get amazing media briefs off AI now for when you need them. I mean, I was just despondent during the Tasmanian campaign being forced to watch network news. Like, it was just painful every single day. And I mean, God, what the ABC is, it's just, and I mean, my grandparents just sit there and watch ABC 24 all day. And I'm going, man, no wonder your opinions are so bad. If all you're doing is watching ABC 24, and this is how you learn about what's going on in the world.
Part of the issue too is political class, John. I mean, I'm not sure that they would be capable of doing an hour-long podcast and being interesting enough. With rare exceptions, there are exceptions to that, but the vast majority, they've been trained to do like a 5-minute press release and stand up, handle a few hostile questions, and if they don't get it, the media doesn't get any zingers, that's a successful day. And and beyond that, they're not forced to do long form, and so
you can't train someone to have a normal conversation, right? Which is what we do. Which is what you do on a podcast: is you sit down, and you have a normal conversation. I mean, even people in politics that I really like. I mean, I like Latham, I like Rethink. I mean, when they've done podcasts, like Rethink did John Lawson's the other day, which is causing some controversy online because he wasn't entirely based on immigration. But he as good as he is, as smart as he is still not great to watch, right? He is still at the end of the day, a dry accountant, ex-Liberal candidate. I mean, Latham is fun sometimes, but he falls into he's a good orator, and he falls into this trap of, like, I think I watched him on Jeremy Buckingham's podcast a while back. Like, he falls into this trap of just doing a sit-down speech. It's hard to have a conversation with someone, to move a conversation around, like you have, like talk about like the things that you want to talk about in this kind of format. But this is the kind of Darwinian evolution of politics. The people who can do that are winning. If you look at JD Vance and you look at Trump.
It's actually, if you do have something to say, it's at people, the political class don't like podcasts, I think, at some level, because, it's risky, I can't control the message. But in some ways, I say to them, it's safer doing it this way, because you can explain in a long way what exactly you mean, rather than doing a speech where they get you sort of slightly off kilter and you say something and then they run that. So if you do a long form, you view it themselves.
Exactly. And part of the model that's so good is and this is why I'm surprised that they haven't really adapted to it, because what is the nightmare scenario for politicians in an interview format? It's the gotcha questions, right? But there's no gotcha questions in podcasts, because it's not in the host's best interest. You don't want to piss someone off and then soil the entire 2 hours. I mean, you want to keep. That's why it's like two normal people having a conversation.
Plus, you get them on the record. You get them on the record. I actually prefer to just let them say what their views are, not necessarily, so then people can actually hear them. And oftentimes when they do articulate at length, it actually is more revealing than if you were trying to stick a microphone in their face and get them to admit to something.
And you learn about people's personalities from it, which you don't get from sound bites. You don't get from standing in press conferences. You don't know like what people are genuinely like in real life. And that's why I watched that Albanese one with Abby Chatfield, right? And I suffered through it. And there were two really weird things about it. One, she changed her format for him. So, which is an interesting thing, because the other guys hadn't. I mean, when you've seen this happen in the US, no one changed their format for Trump and Vance. Like, they just went on and they spoke. So she changed the format to make it.
I wanted Joe Rogan to change his and only make it an hour rather than 3 hours and stuff, and he insisted no. So it was sort of
Yeah, I mean, which was just incredible. I mean, and those are going to be like artifacts for human political history. Like 3 hours with the president. It's probably more. It's a longer interview in one go than I think the entire presidents in the past have had combined. And then you watch like 3 hours of Vance straight after it. It's crazy to think that happened. So, but when you watch Albanese on Abby Chatfield, like, he is just still Anthony Albanese doing an extended press conference. Like, he's not a normal person. No normal person talks like that, right?
Yeah.
And I think what's going to be interesting going forward is there's going to be a generation of guys who come into politics having only done this. And so it's not going to happen yet, but maybe in a few years, the generation of guys who've come through the online culture, the culture of like politics streaming and stuff, who have gone on shows, who, the Drew Pavlou kind of guys, for example, they're going to start going into politics and they're just going to be like this all the time. They're never going to do media training. They're never going to do stand-up press conferences. This will be the content.
Not even going to understand the question when a Channel 10, if it exists, reporter goes, and what did you say about the article that Greg Sheridan wrote about you in this today's Australian? They'll be like,
I didn't read it. Yeah. What? I didn't read that. Yeah. And that's going to be so healthy for our society. Like when we get, because the media have this like toxic influence over things where they are setting the kind of performative boundaries of politics for their own benefit. They want, and it's not a 24-hour media cycle in Australia. We have a 12-hour media cycle in Australia. So they want a 12-hour media cycle where you wake up in the morning, you do morning radio, you do a press conference, you give something to the papers for the 3 to 4 p.m. deadline for online, and then there's an exclusive for the 6 o'clock news, and then you go to bed and you do it all over again. And that's the political culture they want to live in, which is the political culture from when I started working in politics, right? But it's changing, and no one consumes news like that anymore. And plus, just the way we work and the way we live has changed so much. I mean, so much of that was based around the idea that a guy gets up in the morning, he gets in the car, he listens to 2GB, he gets to work, he reads the newspaper with a cup of coffee, he might have the radio on in the office or the building site, and then he gets back in his car, listens to more radio, goes home, watches TV with a wife and kids. The world doesn't work like that anymore. Like no one's doing all those things. So the entire system that created news journalism no longer exists, and it's their own fault. Like they've not contributed anything of value for so long. I mean, name the last groundbreaking piece of news journalism in this country that made everyone stop, that changed the country. I mean, maybe some of the child Royal Commission, the Child Abuse Royal Commission, probably was the last big thing.
Yeah, long form. I mean, there's always good bits in some of the mainstream papers. Like I actually think that the Australian's done okay on the gender crazy stuff. But they're not. They haven't engaged beyond. They have there's no, for example, prominent spokesperson in the Australian newspaper for the Trump agenda that can articulate what it actually means beyond it's a bit confusing, a bit erratic, and maybe he's good for Australia. I'm going to, I know we've gone slightly over time. Just 2 more questions to finish up, John.
No, go for it. Yeah, I got time.
Yeah. First one is, in terms of the provocative stuff that sort of the president and the vice president put online, I noticed and the things they say, J.D. Vance recently said, we're in a late Republican period. If we're going to push back against it, so we're talking about the end of the Republican Rome, we're going to push back against it. We're going to have to get pretty wild, pretty far out there, and go in directions that a lot of conservatives right now are uncomfortable with. Do you think that problems in Australia and across the West are now kind of post-political?
Oh, 100%. And I was arguing with libertarians about this online last night. Just before you get into it, though, when he said that, see, everyone said, oh, he's talking about Rome. He's talking about, Trump as Caesar. See, I didn't necessarily take that away from it. There's a school of thought in the United States. There's a really good interview that lays it out with Curtis Yarvin and Tucker, where Yarvin talks about this idea of there being 4 American republics. And he kind of says, you've got the First Republic before the War of Independence, the Second Republic through to the Gilded Age. The Third Republic is post Truman, and then the Fourth Republic is Trump. And I kind of felt like that was he's kind of talking about the end of an American republic. He's talking about, I thought he was kind of talking about the way things had been done before drawing to a close. But I don't know, the analogy still works both ways.
But it's not. I don't even think he was talking about advocating for a Caesar. He's more talking about, I don't know, the Gracchus brothers, land reform, change structure, actually clamping down on immigration, which probably would have done the Republic of the world of good. Those types of things that help save the civic institutions rather than destroy them.
There is this question about is it too late? I mean, and what I was saying on Twitter last night was, I think John Ruddick from the Libertarians had posted something about saying, if you want to do a U-turn, vote libertarian. And I said, I just think you guys are missing the point, that I don't think we can turn the ship around at this point. I think the decisions that have to be made are radical ones. And we're heading in a direction where the future civil society may be unrecognizable to what it is now. And it may not have the DNA of what we've had in the past still in it. And that, I think, is what kind of Vance is getting at, is that the future for conservatism in the United States is not going to look anything like it did in the past. And what's going to develop out the back of Trump. And I think that Vance is choosing his words really carefully, because Vance is the heir to Trump after this. There's certainly no one else out there. And I think, just like we were saying about guys who can sit on podcasts and appeal to people authentically, I mean, Vance is the only other guy in the United States who can do that. So, I mean, whatever Trump creates now, Vance is going to be taking that into the future. And I don't think it's going to be recognizable. Like, I don't think we're going to have, the same political culture in the next 5 years even that we have now. And I think here in Australia, we're watching that in real time. We're watching the death of the Liberal Party as a centre-right force here in real time. Whatever comes next, whatever's going to fix immigration, whatever's going to fix the economy, whatever's going to secure the country, it's not going to be the Liberals.
I'm slightly less black-pilled and think that the US election shows it is possible to take dramatic kind of changes, but it's clear that the sort of what do we call it, like 80s classical liberal or liberal right type of consensus is no longer fit for purpose if it was ever.
But you look at the post-Trump Republican Party. I mean, how much DNA from the Bush administration is still there?
Huge amounts.
I mean, that would, like there's still elements of that there. Here in Australia, I mean, the DNA just changes. These guys just change their skin suits every time they run. And, right now they've got the wrong one on, and they're basically just running as the Labor Party. Yeah, I just don't see that we can pull that off here in the same way.
I've actually had people on the podcast from DC, and they've said about, still 80% of the Republican elected representatives are still, in their heart of hearts, never Trumpers, or probably where the Aussie right boomers are in terms of like their outlook. And it's just the fact that these guys have gone over the top and then injected a whole lot of new blood into the administration. Like it's really quite awe-inspiring, the people that they're allowing in who are used to personalities and now responsible for developing policy. And in a way that, I don't know, is that maybe our parliamentary democracy in Australia can't quite allow that, because it's hard for an individual to come over the top.
Well, the single biggest problem we have with replicating in Australia is that even though we have the same separation of powers between our executive and legislature, our executive is drawn from the legislature, and so, or culturally it is. So no matter what happens, the jokers that get elected are the jokers who are going to sit in the executive. The Americans aren't hamstrung by that. The Americans can
also, an individual MP, he might have genuinely great new thoughts, I would call new right thoughts, but 80% of his colleagues aren't going to vote for him for leader of the party or adopt his platform, or it'll be in their interest to dump on the dude or woman, whatever. Hey man, last question. What's next for you? Where do you go over the next couple of years?
So I still have some clients because I got to make money and I got to pay rent. But the thing I'm doing two interesting things right now, which is we're trying to get a kind of a radical right youth movement together, pulling together young guys who, they're too intellectual for the young Liberals. They're too intelligent for the National Socialist Network, and they don't have a political home. And so we're trying to give guys a political home. We're trying to bring together some of the existing groups that are out there, that are really active but don't have any political direction. Between now and Christmas, I'm determined to find two guys to run as independents in the South Australian election. Because my kind of thought process around my run was, I have this sincere belief that the only way to do politics is emotion. Like, the worst thing you can do in politics is sit in a room or sit online and talk about, starting new parties or finding donors or whatever. That just doesn't work. You have to be moving and doing things, and that's where the best strategies come from. So I've done it once. I failed. I got 0.4% of the vote, maybe 0.5 by the end of today. And my plan is to just go to South Australia in March and find 2 more guys and try and get 1%. And then we can go to Victoria in November and we can try and get 2%. And, doing that in the background of the kind of right-wing intellectual navel-gazing, I think is going to have a tremendous benefit. Like, we're going to learn things. We're going to learn strategies. We're going to meet new people. We're going to find people whom we might not already be engaged with, whether online or offline. And so I think just kind of driving the suicide truck into politics, and just seeing what you hit along the way, while everyone is having a more philosophical discussion elsewhere, I think it's the smartest thing to do. And that just kind of skips over the debates around, is it going to be a party and what's it going to believe in? Because if we're just in motion, coming up with policies on the fly, coming up with strategies on the fly that might work regionally, it's going to be achieving something. It's not going to be, sitting around doing nothing. So that's kind of my plan for the immediate short term. And in the long term, building up to 2028 with the federal election. And whether it's a party, whether it's an existing party, I could at least be confident I'll be able to go into the federal election. And I don't actually intend to run again. I don't think it's right for me. But I've always been a back office guy. I've always been a political advisor. What I'm saying to guys at the moment who might be considering running is, well, we're not calling this a party. This isn't a political party. This is a movement of right-wing independence. The only commitment you need to give is to pay it forward on the next one. So I ran here. I'll go to South Australia. I want the guys in South Australia to come with me to Victoria. And then I want the guys in Victoria to come with me to New South Wales for the next time. So we can kind of build a campaign movement, starting with one guy. Like a virus, essentially. So that's kind of what I'm working on at the moment.
I get despondent, like some people do, about the state of the politics in Australia and where we're heading. But at the same time, it's sort of, there's a case for an incredible, an optimistic case, because you've got the internet. You can connect with people quickly en masse. You can you can actually break through and have discussions. There's no gatekeepers if you don't want them to be there. You can. There is a massive space there for something new, because the existing consensus is just so obviously broken and out of date politically and organizationally and everything else. So if you want to, sort of what you want is, if you want a new opportunity, there's one to be had, but it can be done well and done poorly. These things can always go off the rails. So it's important to seek the counsel of people like you, John.
Thanks.
Please we connected and look forward to catching up further in future.
Definitely. Let's do it again. All right. Thanks very much, mate.
Bye.